have a little contest about who can teach math the best. So the title of my talk is #Squad Goals, Diverse Teams Generate Bonuses. For those of you who don't know what #Squad Goals means, this is the Oxford English Dictionary definition. It's used in reference to a person or a thing that's seen as a model to aspire to or to emulate. So I wanted to start with a question. Who am I and what defines me? Well, that's a really hard question, actually. It will take longer to answer that question than the time that I have allotted for this talk. But I'm a black woman. I'm an American. I am 32 years old. I was born in 1985. My mom was a teenage mom. Technically, being born in 1985 makes you a millennial, embarrassingly. I went to college when I was 16. I finished when I was 19. I was the first college graduate in my family. I was the first doctor in my family. I'm the oldest of 3 siblings. I am from New Jersey. I lived in Philadelphia. I lived in Pittsburgh. And I live in Nashville. I like country music. I ran my first half marathon last month. I'm a chief resident. I love operating. I love celebrity gossip. I'm going to use a lot of examples of celebrity gossip. I'm a foodie. I read detective novels. I subscribe to 5 different fashion magazines. I can tell you what those are, but you might not care. All these things individually, they don't define who I am, but they give you an essence. Who you are influences what you know, how you think, how you interact with the world. Our identity diversity directly influences our cognitive diversity, how we think differently from other people. It's also how we solve hard problems and how we generate new ideas or innovate. So I just want to put this disclaimer that this talk is not a talk about social justice or equality. It's not about ageism or sexism or racism. It's about math and innovation. So try to stay with me. I'm first going to talk about the diversity deficit. And some of this might be hard to hear, but you have to know the information in order to know how you can do things better. This is a composite of the section of surgical sciences. There are 140 physicians in our section. What if I told you that only 33 are women? That's 23% of the section. Now, what if I told you that only 3 are African Americans? That's 2% of the section. What if I told you that most of the department chairs and division chiefs are white men? That's okay. But only 1 woman holds a division chief or department chair position in our section. Now, we could examine the distribution of the women a little bit more closely and look at their rank distribution. I told you that there are 33 women in the section. 3 of those are full professor. That's 9% of the women and 2% of the section. And the light gray is the distribution or the percentages of women who are full professor, associate professor, assistant professor. And the dark gray are the percentages of men in the section who are full professor, associate professor, and assistant professor. Now, how does that compare to the national averages? I mean, when you hear those numbers, you have to ask yourself, are we different or are we just like everyone else? So if we look at the national averages, obviously women make up 50% of the population in the country. That's just genetics. But African Americans and Latinos make up 31% of the population based on the current US Census data. If you look at medical school graduates in the United States, women make up about 50%, almost over 50% now. But African Americans and Latinos only make up 15% of US medical school graduates. And then when you get to academic surgery, women, on average, make up 21% of the faculty. But underrepresented minorities, particularly African Americans, only make up 7%. There's lots of reasons behind these numbers. You could argue that there are fewer minority physicians in the pipeline. That's true. You could argue that the qualified pool of women and underrepresented minorities to hire from is small. That's true too. You could argue that there's not a lot of role models for underrepresented minorities and for women in leadership positions. That's true too. You could say that recruitment is challenging. That's true. You could also say that retention is challenging. That's true too. But I want want to show you some more numbers that really resonate with me. Let's talk about astronauts. NASA selected the first group of astronauts in 1959. Since then, there's been 330 astronauts. 16 of those astronauts were African Americans. This was highlighted recently by the movie Hidden Figures and the role of African Americans in getting to the moon. 5 women were African Americans that became astronauts. So 1.5% of all astronauts were black women. Now, it turns out that that's the same number of women who will have graduated from this residency program, if I include myself and I don't get fired. First graduate was Alfred Blaylock in 1927, and we'll have graduated in 394 residents from this program if we include this graduating class. Now, the final number that I wanted to share that I was surprised to learn, especially after going through the interview trail for pediatric surgery, is that nearly 1,200 pediatric surgeons have been trained to date, but only 12 African American women have ever become a pediatric surgeon. So, do those numbers matter? I hope to show you that they do. I hope to show you that forming a more diverse team or squad can generate bonuses, that these bonuses can yield innovation. I'm not posing an argument for inclusion's sake. I am suggesting that forming teams or hiring using a standard metric like we do now to select the best people might not always generate the best team. I'm going to show you that. The best team will be diverse. I'm going to model that. Forming your squad doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice excellence for diversity. The ideal squad would be diverse and excellent. We know that companies with diverse teams have stronger financial performance, but we're not in the business of making money. We're in the business of taking care of patients. But it's worth noting that the world's most innovative companies often are also ranked highly, at least by Forbes, as America's best employers for diversity. As a final note before I get to the math and do a better job than Jason, I want to comment on something called diversity fatigue. A columnist in The Economist, he wrote that 2017 was a year of diversity fatigue. Another columnist in The New Yorker, he wrote the following: people running corporations and overseeing newsrooms began complaining of an affliction called diversity fatigue. While many of these institutions broadly supported efforts to create a more diverse American workforce, actually doing that by recruiting and nurturing minority talent was hard, often exhausting work. Diversity fatigue described the stress that managers felt when tasked with realizing these goals. My goal here is not to fatigue you with diversity. It's to show you how diversity has the potential to add something extra. So now I'm going to get to the math. I'm going to tell you how teams perform better than individuals, how diversity can generate bonuses. The logic comes from this book called The Diversity Bonus. A lot of the logic in the diversity bonus comes from another book called The Wisdom of Crowds. Scott Page is the author of the book, and he's a professor at the University of Michigan, where I'm going. He's a professor of political science, complex systems, and economics, but basically he's a mathematician. I went to a meeting, the first Women in Surgery Leadership Development Conference at the University of Michigan last fall, and when I got there, I walked in, I was kind of one of the last people to get there, my flight was delayed, my Uber didn't come, and I was a little bit frazzled, and when I got there, it was lunch, and when I sat down at lunch, I sat at the empty table by myself and didn't really recognize anyone that I knew or that I had interviewed with there, and a gentleman came and sat down next to me, and it was Dr. Mulholland, who's the chair there, and we had never met. We made our introductions, and he told me how reading this book changed his entire perspective as a leader and as a chairman of surgery. So I read the book. In the book, Scott Page challenges leaders to move beyond the assumption that you get the best results by gathering a group of experts who have all trained and have similar backgrounds and similar skills in education. He uses a lot of math and a lot of examples. I'm going to try to present a very simplified version. First, before we get to more math, let's talk about teams, because teams are not just the sum of their parts. 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. Sometimes it equals 3. In 2010, a group of researchers from MIT and Carnegie Mellon, they wanted to know if a group has its own intelligence, kind of like a group IQ. And so they thought of a group intelligence or a group IQ as collective ability of a group. So in your mind, you might think that a group's collective ability is based on the average ability of all the individuals in that group. Well, that's not true. You might think also that the collective ability of a group to perform a task is based on the best person in that group, or the most smart person, or the person with the most ability. Like if LeBron James is in Miami, Miami is going to win. And if LeBron James is in Cleveland, then Cleveland is going to win. But that isn't true either. The average individual intelligence wasn't a predictor of the group's performance. And the smartest person in the group also wasn't a predictor of the group's performance. What was a predictor of the group's performance to complete a complex task was if women were in the group or not. The groups who had women did better. What was a negative predictor of how the group performed was if there was a loudmouth in the group. If one person occupied all the conversation and other people didn't have the opportunity to speak, they had fewer speaking terms. Another paper that came out in 2013, also in Science, was a study published by a group of researchers from Northwestern. They looked at 17.9 million science publications. They wanted to know that if new work was published, was it a new idea, de novo, or was it a combination of work that had been published before? And they wanted to know if the new work that just came from a spontaneous idea, or if the combinations of work that came from old ideas that had been published before were impactful or very innovative. So they found that the highest impact science came from conventional combinations of stuff that was already published, and that collaborative groups compared to individuals or single authors were more likely to make novel combinations of work that had already been published. In essence, the teams or the collaborators were more innovative and more impactful. They had more citations than individual authors. So let's get to the math. Scott Page, he has the diversity prediction theorem, which states that team accuracy is equal to individual accuracy plus diversity. So let us use an example. These are my friends also. Okay. So we can start with an example of trying to predict how many vascular consults will you get on a Saturday. Susie, she predicts 10. Natasha, she predicts 16. Jason predicts 25. That's just crazy. I mean, why would you have 25 consults? Anyway, if we add these up and divide by 3, if we add these up, it totals 51, and divide by 3, the average is 17. So the group's prediction is 17 consults. Okay. Let's say the actual number of vascular consults we got on Saturday was 18. So the group's prediction is pretty close to the actual number of consults that we got. Now let's look at the individual error. In applied mathematics, the error is the difference between the true value, the actual number of consults we got 18, and the estimate or the prediction. So Susie guessed 10, and the actual number of consults was 18. 10 minus 18 is minus 8 squared is 64. Natasha guessed 16, the actual number of consults was 18. 16 minus 18 is negative 2 squared is 4. Jason guessed 25. 25 minus 18 is 7. 7 squared is 49. On average, the individual error is 39. So Natasha is the most accurate. She has the least error. And Susie is actually the least accurate. She has the most error. So let's look at the crowd's error. So we said that the group or the crowd predicted 17 consults would come on Saturday on average, but the actual number of consults was 18. So 17 minus 18 is minus 1 squared is 1. So the crowd is very close to the actual number of consults, closer than any individual in the group. Now let's look at the variation or the diversity of the individuals from each other. We said that the average prediction of the group or the crowd was 17. We can go back. Susie, she guessed 10. 10 minus 17 is minus 7 squared is 49. Natasha guessed 16. 16 minus the group's prediction 17 squared minus 1 squared is 1. And Jason guessed 25. 25 minus 17 is 8 squared is 64. So the average variation or diversity is 38. Now, I told you that the crowd's error was 1, and the individual error was 39, and that the diversity was 38, and 39 minus 38 is equal to 1. So did I just make this example up or steal it from Scott Page? Is it rigged? It's not rigged. It turns out this is always true. What it also means is that the collective error or the group's error will be small and very close to the truth if the diversity is very large in the group, but that the question is not a super easy question to answer. Meaning, if we always get 5 vascular consults on Saturday, then Susie, Natasha, and Jason would have just guessed 5. They wanted to guess 10, 16, and 25 because it's not a hard question to answer. There's no variables. They're not considering whether there's a lot of trauma activations or it's raining outside or any of the factors that can influence the number of vascular consults we can get in one day. It also assumes that you can't guess something totally crazy. I mean, Jason couldn't guess 50,000 consults on a Saturday. I mean, that just wouldn't happen. So it has to be a group of reasonable people making a reasonable prediction, and there has to be some variation or some diversity in order to make the crowd's error low. So the diversity prediction theorem can be represented by this formula. It essentially is showing you that the team error, which I already defined, is equal to the individual error minus the diversity. I alluded before to the fact that who we are influences how we think, and if your brain doesn't hurt yet, then I'd like to go over a few definitions. Scott Page breaks down cognitive repertoires, or how we think, into 5 different components. The first component is information. Information is just facts. I just want to say that all the examples I'm going to give you of these definitions are 100% influenced by my interest in celebrity gossip, because how I think is influenced by my interest. So for information, I can tell you that Kim Kardashian's kids are named Saint, North, and Chicago. Those are facts. Nobody really cares, but they're facts that are in my mind. The second component is knowledge. Knowledge is how you comprehend information. To expand on the Kim Kardashian example, I can say that in Kim Kardashian's first and second pregnancy, she gained 50 pounds. In her second pregnancy, she had preeclampsia. So for her third child that she wanted, she elected to get a surrogate instead of getting pregnant again. And that is an assimilation of facts or knowledge and demonstrates comprehension. The third categorization is representations. Representations can be divided into perspectives and categorizations. It's how we process information. You can assign a unique identifier to different sets of possibilities or alternatives, or you can categorize them into groups. I think as surgeons, we often categorize things into groups. So to take the Kim Kardashian example one step further, we could say that you can categorize Kris Jenner's kids, her daughters at least, into 2 separate categories: the Jenner daughters, Kylie and Kendall, and the Kardashian daughters, Kim, Kourtney, and Khloe. Those are categorizations. All right, I'm going to drop the Kim Kardashian thing now. So the fourth component are the models. Models allow you to consolidate large sets of information. It's a systematic, simplified description of something that shares or captures the relevant features of that something. And then the last component, they're heuristics or tools. They're methods for how we find solutions and how we generate new ideas. A single tool doesn't have to be used for every single problem. You have different tools for different problems, but some tools can be used in different disciplines or different domains, because the tools might be able to be used in different ways in different applications. It's important to note that in order for this representation of cognitive repertoires to work, that tools or heuristics, they don't have to be learned in any particular order. They're not dependent on each other. So now this is my second model, the toolbox model. Back to Susie and Jason. So assume you have 3 different individuals who have different abilities. Susie has the highest ability. Her ability is 5. Jason has the lowest ability, obviously. His ability is 3. Natasha has average ability, her ability is 4. So, Jason's riding the struggle bus, but that's okay, we'll still keep him. If we hire people by metric, saying that Susie has the highest ability, we will miss out on a diversity bonus. I'm going to show you that. So now let's look at the tools or heuristics that they each have in their toolbox that represents their ability. Susie has A, B, C, D, and E. Natasha has A, D, E, and F. Jason has C, D, and G. His toolbox is lacking. So we might assume that the best team is composed of the individuals who have the highest ability. That will be Natasha and Susie, because Natasha has ability of 4 and Susie has ability of 5. But actually, that turns out to be incorrect, because between them, they only have 6 unique tools. They both have A, they both have B, and they both have E. So in total, they overlap quite a bit. And you could say, to make this work, me and Susie both trained in Pittsburgh. We both lived in the Northeast. We both like fashion. We both like restaurants. So maybe our cognitive repertoires have a lot of overlap. So between us, even though it seemed like Susie had the highest ability, and whatever team she's on would be the best team, they don't have a lot of diversity, and so they don't really generate any bonuses by working together. Now, let's talk about Jason's struggle bus. He only had 3 tools. So we assume that being on a team with Jason is a worse team, but in fact, that's not true either. Even though Jason and Natasha are the individuals with the least ability combined, they actually have 7 unique tools between them because none of their tools or heuristics overlap. So they generate a bonus. A diversity bonus will arise in teams when a member brings a unique tool to the table. You'll lose the diversity bonus if your team is homogeneous or the same. So what about tool combination? Now we can go back to the team with the individual highest ability, Susie and Natasha again, and Natasha can make 6 individual combinations on her own, and Susie can make 10. But if you subtract the overlapping combinations that they can make and include the 2 new combinations that they can make, C and F and D and F, then in total they can make 15 unique combinations. That's not that bad. But if you go back to the team with the lowest individual ability, Natasha can make 16 unique combinations, and Jason can only make 3 unique combinations. But it turns out that between them, they can make 21 unique, non-overlapping combinations. So they generate a bonus. In fact, 12 of the new combinations arise from them just being a team. So a diversity bonus will also arise from new tool combinations. The fact that someone can know fewer but different tools means that they can have less perceived ability, but they can still contribute to the group and generate a bonus. This also highlights how combining tools can yield innovation, like the science paper that I referenced. New combinations of what is already known can be innovative and impactful. So these models rest on a few caveats. If you look at the model, you would say that the more people that you have on the team, the more combinations you could have, the more bonuses you could generate. But that's true and that's not true, because the larger the group, the higher the communication costs. We're making an assumption that Susie and Natasha can have a civil conversation with each other, and that Jason and Natasha can also have a civil conversation with each other and communicate effectively to be able to share their knowledge and combine the tools. That is assumed in order to make the model work. We're also assuming that you don't have to learn the tools in a particular order. So in some fields, you do have to learn things in particular orders. If you need a problem solved with calculus, you need somebody who knows calculus. If you need to know arithmetic and algebra before you can do calculus, then you don't want somebody who can only do arithmetic. They're just not going to be able to do it. You just want the person who knows calculus. The last assumption is that one person can't know everything. If one person knew everything, then you don't need a team at all. You just want the know-it-all because they know all the information. I don't think that, this is saying that we should all change what we do right now. But I hope that the way that I've explained things, that you have this concept of diversity bonus now in your cognitive repertoire, and you can at least consider it. I'm not suggesting that we should blindly pursue identity diversity to get cognitive diversity any more than I'm suggesting that you should always select the person with the best ability for hire based on a checklist of pedigree or a 20-minute interview. What I'm suggesting and what Scott Page in his book, The Diversity Bonus, was trying to confer is that we should think about how and when diversity, identity, and cognitive diversity might matter for accomplishing a particular task. That task might be forming a team to cure hepatoblastoma, or trying to innovate in artificial bile duct. So I wanted to end with a question, because I started with a question: who do I want to be? I want to be a leader. I want to be a pediatric surgeon. I want to belong to a diverse squad or team. I want to establish a pediatric liver center of excellence. I want to work with a team of people who don't look like me and who don't think like me, who think different than me. I want to combine my toolbox with other people's toolbox. I want to improve the surgical care of children, and I want to be an innovator. So I want to know, who do you want to be?